gave us James McRory and Paul McStay. They gave us Johnston, Tully, Murdoch, Gold and Hay. And most of the football greats have passed through Parkhead's gates. But to play football the Glasgow Celtic way. And they played football the Glasgow Celtic way.
And welcome to the Celtic Ray podcast. I am your host, Stephen Ray, and I've got a special bonus podcast this week with the signing of Diego Laxalt. All the way from Brazil, I have Ewan Marshall. Now, Ewan, it says Glaswegian journalist in Sao Paulo at Brazilian Report, freelance for Telegraph, Al Jazeera and others. Welcome to the show.
Aye, great to be here, thanks.
So, before we get into the discussion on Diego Laxalt, how does a Glaswegian end up in Sao Paulo?
Well, I mean, I like to think that Sao Paulo and basically most of Brazil and most of South America is like the kind of polar opposite to Glasgow and the rest of Scotland.
Sunny.
Exactly. Well, the weather is the first thing I was going to mention. There's always lots going on, and of course the weather's beautiful, all that sort of stuff. And you know, the people are quite beautiful as well. And you know, there's just so much kind of culture and life always on the street here. So it's just a big attraction in comparison to, you know, growing up in Glasgow, where you know not that much goes on.
Yeah.
I
suppose you would get that with the biggest city in South America, Sao Paulo. I think it's like 30 million people. Is that right, roughly?
Yeah, well, like kind of Greater Sao Paulo in population terms is probably about four or five times the size of Scotland in terms of total population. Yeah. So it's absolutely massive city, and you know that's a big draw as well. It really feels like you're in one of the kind of world global cities. You know, I mean, there's everything here, everything's happening here. So yeah, no, I love it.
Beautiful weather, beautiful people. It can't get much better than that.
Certainly do things that can't be said for Glasgow.
Yeah, well, to be fair, Glasgow's cleaned its act up over the last probably 10 years or so, and a lot of the high rises are coming down. And I mean, I live just in the outskirts nowadays of Glasgow and Barrhead, but it doesn't sound as glamorous as Sao Paulo, that's for sure. Just looking at your Twitter bio, you've got a pinned tweet, and I'll obviously advertise this for you. You've done a 3-part podcast series on the 1970 World Cup, exploring the fact, myth and legend and legacy of Brazil's historic triumph. You want to tell us a wee bit about that?
Yeah, so this is the site that I work for. I'm an editor at this site, the Brazilian Report. We basically do like news on Brazil in English, but it's kind of focused on like politics, finance, environment, all that sort of stuff. But every now and then, because I'm a good employee, all that sort of stuff, I get the chance to write about the stuff that really matters, you know, the football.
Excellent.
So this was on the anniversary of the 1970 World Cup win. It was the 50th anniversary this year. So I did a wee kind of 3-part podcast special talking about the kind of the history behind that, some of the myths that are involved in, like, you know, this whole kind of fantastical image we have of the 70 World Cup. You know, it was spectacular, but it was maybe spectacular for different reasons that we remember it being. Hopefully that's a good enough wee teaser to get you in and listening to it.
I've always been drawn to South American football. I've been more Argentina than Brazil, if I'm honest. But the whole story of South America and football and how it was introduced to the country and how it came from the UK, and particularly Scotland as well, had a big part to play in it. It just fascinates me. I think the culture, the fan culture, I'm really drawn to, and I love the Libertadores tournament. I find it a brilliant watch. It's so passionate when the fans are allowed in and stuff like that. And obviously Flamengo won it last year in the dying minutes against River Plate, which was an unbelievable match. So yeah, I'll definitely give that a listen, and I'll plug the hell out of it for you, and hopefully get some more people onto you for that. That's brilliant. But I'm assuming...
Appreciated.
No, it's great. So you are a Celtic fan yourself, yes?
Yep, Celtic fan, which makes it a bit difficult living in Brazil because the time difference can be a bit tricky depending on kind of British summertime. So I often end up waking up at about, I don't know, 7:30 in the morning, making a cup of coffee and watching Celtic as opposed to, maybe being in the pub or something like that. So it's a bit of a different culture supporting Celtic over here.
Yeah, I know that obviously I'd seen you chatting to another podcast person that I've done some shows with, and that's Mark Cooper, who's based in Argentina. So I seen you comment on Diego Laxalt, which helped me sort of reach out to you. I just thought there's a Scot living in South America. I thought it knows a lot about this player, so I thought I'd get you on. So I appreciate you coming on. So. I'm assuming you've covered a lot across South American football, and you know quite a bit about Diego Laxalt. I know a bit about him, but people might not necessarily want to listen to me. They'd rather listen to people who know more about South American football than myself. So, what can you tell us, and what can we look forward to as a Celtic player?
Well, I mean, first of all, kind of declaring my interest a little bit as someone who follows South American football and has been really into it, and also happens to be a Celtic fan. I've always been really keen on maybe seeing a few South Americans actually playing for Celtic. I think probably in my whole lifetime, I think we've had maybe three, being like Rafael Scheitz, Juninho, and then Miko from Venezuela. I don't think there's been any others. So yeah, that just seeing Laxalt potentially being linked with Celtic yesterday in the afternoon was quite a thrill for me. Dead excited to see him over at Celtic because he's someone I've followed quite a bit over the years. Seen him for the very first time when he was 19, turning 20, playing for the Uruguayan under-20s in 2013. So that was a South American under-20s championship, and Laxalt was this left midfielder, but a very kind of attacking left midfielder, almost like a kind of on the left side of a front three, almost in the way he was playing. And one of the amazing things actually about Laxalt is if you'd seen him then in 2013, he looks exactly the same as he does today. He's still got those kind of youthful looks and the exact same haircut as he did back in 2013. And he looked like a really promising player in that particular tournament. Uruguay had a good go at it. They finished third, if I remember rightly. But there was one particular game against Brazil which got quite a lot of attention over here in Brazil, obviously because they were very, very excited about their own under-20 team up against Uruguay. They thought that they were going to give Uruguay a pasting. Diego Laxalt scores the opener within the first 10 minutes, a kind of lovely volley from just outside the box. And there's a great game ensues. It's 2 each, and then right at the last minute, Laxalt breaks out from his own half, busts over the halfway line, lays it on a plate for the striker to make it 3-2 in the last minute, and for Uruguay a win. So there was really, after that game and after that tournament, there was a lot of expectation around him about what kind of player he could turn out to be. He was playing at Club Defensor Sporting in Uruguay at the time. That's kind of, say maybe kind of the third or fourth club in Uruguay. And Inter Milan quickly became interested in him. I believe they signed him up not long after that tournament. But the thing is with Laxalt is that since then, Italy has just been a lot of ups and downs for him. I imagine you might have seen him a few times playing for Genoa, which was really the only Italian club that it basically worked out for Laxalt at, being bounced around from a bunch of other loans and things. And I think at Genoa, he was able to kind of show the player that he looks like he's becoming as he now kind of approaching his peak, which is not this kind of left side and more of a kind of left midfield or kind of attacking left wing back, which is obviously the position that Celtic have procured him for.
Yeah.
And yeah, just dead interested to see him in a Celtic shirt.
I mean, there's South American players, and I do follow Italian football. I've got a bit of a soft spot for Inter, and obviously you said he turned up at Inter probably just after that tournament. But like you said, he's kind of bounced about, and he did seem to have 2 sort of pretty strong years at Genoa, and then he had I think he really came to prominent for most people in maybe Scotland or the UK, when he had a brilliant tournament for Uruguay, and I think he played left back mainly for Uruguay in that tournament, and obviously that's probably what helped him get his move to AC Milan. But apparently he was almost on the verge of signing for Atalanta at the time, and I think if you look at Atalanta just now and the way they play and the way they coach their players, it probably would have been a better move for him. But I suppose the draw of AC Milan would have been pretty hard to turn down, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned him playing for Uruguay at left back, and I think the real key to Laxalt's kind of character and his quality is his involvement with the Uruguayan national team. The way that things work in Uruguay is that there's a bit of lore about Uruguayan football, as they have this sort of this grit that they're born with. They call it the Garra Charrua, which is a reference to the indigenous Charrua people which used to live in Uruguay, hundreds of years ago. And it's like this kind of never say die, fight to the end attitude that the players, especially the players that go through the national team system, are really kind of instilled with from a young age. And the special thing about the national team system in Uruguay is that there is no, I mean, obviously there is a difference between the first team and the under-20s and the under-16s and all that sort of thing, but it is really one cohesive unit. It's all about bringing up your players from your youth teams and blooding them into the first team. For example, you'll have, if Luis Suarez, for example, has to pull out of a qualification squad and they need to call up a new centre forward, they won't call up necessarily the centre forward that happens to be Uruguayan, that happens to be in the best form, around the world of football. They'll look to their under-20s team and see who works in that system, who knows the system, who has this kind of national team spirit already inside them. And I think LaxCelt, for his years of involvement with the Uruguayan national team, he really has that in him. He's a fighter. He'll give you 90 minutes or 90, 94 minutes, 95 minutes, however long he needs to really fight for his team. He's got kind of superb stamina, a bit of pace as well, but he'll be constantly working up and down that left flank all day, which is really quite interested to see that at Celtic, because we've seen a lot of players recently in these kind of fullback positions which have the lung power, which have the kind of determination to go 90 minutes, but there's always kind of lacking a little bit of quality. I mean, you look at, for example, Greg Taylor at the moment. He does get into these positions, but the end product is really quite poor.
Taylor seems to lack that guile to sort of really make the difference when he gets in there. I've said it on the weekly podcast that we do. He looks like a player who's always played in a defensive team, and now he's been put into an offensive team, and then sometimes he just seems to lack that wee bit that's required at that level just to make the difference for a wing back, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in a team like Celtic and in a league like the Scottish League, when you're playing with wing backs, you really need to expect a lot of kind of attacking production from these players, which, I mean, you get from Frimpong, for example, on the other side. But relying on Greg Taylor for an entire season would be a problem for Celtic, and that's obviously why they've looked at LaxCelt. They've thought that this is the man to kind of fit that role. I think there might be a case for kind of tempering expectations a little bit, because LaxCelt's not going to be the guy that shoots from distance, that takes free kicks, takes all the corners, or moves inside and dictates play. He's not that kind of player. He's a workhorse who has plenty of technique. I don't imagine we're going to see a bundle of goals from him, but you'd expect a good few assists, for example.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing when I seen him in the 2018 World Cup. He stands out just with his hair. It takes a lot for a guy to carry off that hairstyle, to be fair. But the tenacity that he's got, it's just in the energy levels was what really stood out, and technically he was very good. And I remember I actually was searching back some tweets I'd made about him a couple of years ago, and I remember thinking because there was rumours at the time that KT may be going in 2018, and I just remember saying this is the kind of guy we need to be going after and replace. And I actually wrote a year ago that we should take half the KT money and give it to Milan for LaxCelt. But why do you think it's not worked out for him mainly in Italy, although he done really well at Genoa? Do you think Italy's had enough of him and he's had enough of Italy and he's just up for trying something new? Or
well, the thing with Milan, when he moves to Milan, it's obviously we have to qualify this with the caveat that I don't often watch Italian football, but I will watch it if there's a player I'm interested in who's actually going to be playing, and the fact that LaxCelt wasn't even getting on the pitch, I wasn't really watching much of Milan.
Yeah.
But I suspect that one of the issues there is that Milan play with a kind of flat four in defence. So they play with a kind of complete fullback. I believe it's Theo Hernandez that plays there, who's a excellent player. And so LaxCelt just didn't really kind of get that sniff in the team that he would have hoped that he did. Because in Genoa, for example, Genoa's system fit him perfectly. They played essentially how Celtic do, with three at the back and two wing backs bombing forward. And LaxCelt, I believe, played 36 games a season for 2 years in a row for Genoa in that kind of left wing back position. So I believe it might have been something to do with that. Like, the formation didn't really fit his style. He was kind of in the middle of being a left back and a left winger, and it's difficult to kind of to break your way into a squad like that when your position isn't really available to you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it seems a bit a strange signing. If Milan have always been built on having a solid defence and a really strong back four, and then creative players and brilliant strikers. So personally, I think he's just took the chance at Milan. It's one of the world's biggest clubs and stuff like that, and it's obviously just not worked out for him. Obviously, he had a year at Torino where I think he'd played 20 plus games last season. Well, Neil Lennon had actually said today that they tried to get him last year, which I was actually surprised at. But obviously it didn't work out at the time. I don't know whether it was the loan fee or they were looking for too much money, but we've got him now, and I must admit that most Celtic fans that have heard of him or seen him are really excited to see him in a Celtic shirt. It's unfair on Greg Taylor, but at the end of the day, Celtic are in the business of getting results and big results, and if this guy can help bring it, let's hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main worries, I think, with players from South America, in Scotland and in Britain as a whole, is kind of settling in and adapting. So the issue of the language barriers is a big problem, which I hope that the club are gonna give them the English lessons and get them up to speed with his English. But for a player who doesn't speak English and is basically being parachuted into Glasgow, it's really not the ideal city to live in when you don't speak the language.
Especially when half the population of Glasgow can't speak English either.
It's a complicated thing, yeah. So that's going to be a big issue. I hope that he can be bedded in as quick as possible. I mean, he knows Olivier Ntcham. He played alongside him at Genoa. But beyond that, I mean, I'm not sure there's that many links within the club or many kind of Spanish-speaking players. But if he can get over that, if he can learn the language and be able to kind of work with his teammates, that will be a huge boost. Because the thing is, there's a difference between a Uruguayan coming over to Britain and a Brazilian or a Colombian or these kind of nations more to the north of South America. Because Uruguay is, in terms of climate, it's not that far away from Scotland, and the landscape's similar as well. It's not. It's much cooler. It's much more temperate. Yeah, it's a similar sized country, and an equally football mad country as well. And even the league, there's a lot of comparisons there because in Uruguay you're basically dominated by two big teams, and the rest are just really struggling to compete constantly.
Yeah.
Which you see in Scotland as well. So I think that Uruguayans, not just LaxCelt, but Uruguayans could find it slightly easier to adapt to somewhere like Scotland, but providing that they're able to learn the language, which is, crucially important at this stage.
I think the one thing it gives me hope is that Lennon obviously brought in Emilio Izaguirre, and I know it's a Central American, but obviously Spanish speaking. It was his first time in an English speaking country, and we managed to sort of get really good years out of Izaguirre under Neil Lennon. And I don't know if he'll employ the similar sort of, tactics, or not so much tactics, but sort of man management to LaxCelt that he did for Izzy that helped him through. And I'm hoping that the club, help the player with the language side and help him getting settled in, because I think he's got a young family as well, a wife and a young child. So it's going to be a big move for him, man. But it's a huge move for us. And I think the fact that there's no fans just now, that might actually take a wee bit of pressure off, just in case he's not settled right away, But I think he's such a quality player that I think he'll settle in pretty quickly, and he's been away from Uruguay for a number of years now, so it's not as if he's coming straight. I always have that fear that South Americans coming straight from, I don't know, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, straight to Scotland if they will ever settle in, because the UK is maybe not necessarily the easiest place to fit in for a player from one of those countries.
Yeah, definitely not. But as well, I mean, the UK is drastically different from Italy as well. So it's still, there's still a big kind of cultural shock that he's going to feel. But that's it. As long as he gets on the pitch and starts, getting plenty of games, and that's the thing that he needs right now. LaxCelt, at this point in his career, he has to basically be playing at least kind of 35 games a season, because he's lost his place in the Uruguayan national team. The current left back who holds that kind of constant spot there is Matias Vinha, who's slightly younger. He plays here actually in São Paulo. He plays for the team that I follow here, Palmeiras. He's a really, really talented footballer. So it's unlikely that LaxCelt is going to be able to take that position back, left back. And they just called up as the backup left back. They just went to a young 19-year-old from the Uruguayan league. So it's obvious that LaxCelt is kind of frozen out at the moment due to the fact that he's hardly played any football. So I'm sure that's going to be huge motivation for him, just getting on the pitch, potentially playing every game between now and the end of the season, to maybe kind of get himself back in the headlines a bit and perhaps get himself back in the national team.
The one good thing about Celtic is if the season does get played out, which we hope it all does, that they will play somewhere in the region of 60, 65 games in the season. So he should get at least 30 games out of this season. I'd like to hope, a player of that quality will play a lot more. So, I don't think you'll get back in the national team with performances in Scotland, but I think the fact that we're in the Europa League, and especially against Milan, I think if he can perform at that level, then, he may have a good chance of getting back.
Well, yeah, I mean, you never know. The manager, Oscar Tabares, he's been the manager of Uruguay for essentially as long as I've been in South America. He's and actually had a lot more. He's been there for ages, and he's the one that's kind of seen LaxCelt through his youth, through the Uruguayan youth teams, brought him up to the national team, played him at the World Cup. So, he knows him, he trusts him. So I'm sure that he will be keeping an eye on Celtic, knowing that LaxCelt is there. So no, I think there's every possibility that he could definitely get back in the squad, considering especially that the South American qualifiers for the World Cup the calendar is absolute frenzy until the end of next year. There's going to be a lot of games, and yeah, there's a good chance, especially with all this kind of the coronavirus pandemic, that we might have a good few call-offs. So LaxCelt could see himself back in the first team soon enough.
Excellent. Well, Ewan, I'd like to say thanks for coming on and discussing LaxCelt and obviously your podcast series, and just giving us a wee bit of background on yourself. For anybody that wants to follow you on Twitter, what's your Twitter handle?
So it's just at Ewan Marshall, Ewan spelt with a U. All the stuff that I do, you'll be able to see it there, all my writing or podcasts or just random opinions on Celtic.
Well, when I post the podcast out, I'll make sure that your Twitter handle's in there and make sure people I'll give you a shout out, and also I'll advertise this on my weekly podcast as well. But I'll stick this out tonight, and I hope anybody has fears of Celtic signing a South American, I hope that's laid to rest for the time being until we get the guy on the pitch, and then hopefully we'll get to see his talent, because I think he's an absolutely brilliant signing for Celtic, and I honestly can't wait to see it. And we've actually got a couple of guys who are the Argentinian Celtic Supporters Club. They've been really, although from Argentina, they're really excited that Celtic's now got a South American in the side. I've seen their Twitter going mental last night, which was pretty good.
Should get them a gig as LaxCelt's translator, then that would be good.
Well, one of the guys is actually based over here. I think he's working here now. I met them prior to the Cup semi-final a couple of years ago against Rangers, and managed to get a wee interview out of one of them, and they'd made the trip across, but I think one of them now lives here, and so you never know, Celtic may call upon him to help him through his time until he gets settled in. But yeah, that's a good shout actually.
Yeah, get that CV sent in.
Yeah. So how's work been? How's life in Sao Paulo at the minute with the coronavirus? Is lockdown? Are you going through similar to what we're suffering here in Scotland? Or
yeah, so Brazil has basically been one of the worst affected countries by the coronavirus in the entire world. We've had close to 5 million cases and close to 150,000 deaths. And it's that those are kind of the official figures. There's a lot of reason to believe that there's underreporting going on and all that sort of thing. But just the way that it's handled here is like it's just been this really long slog of a kind of lack of information, a lack of action, and a kind of lack of response from society. It's interesting talking to my family and friends back in Scotland and the UK that the restrictions and the lockdown guidelines and social distancing guidelines seem to be kind of changing quite a lot in Britain. Like, you can only meet with X number of people until X o'clock at night, all that sort of stuff. But here, we've essentially been left our own devices for the last, I would say, maybe 4 months. Things are, your bars and restaurants are opening and working with restrictions, but basically we're not told anything about where we can go, who we can meet with, how many people we can meet with, what activities we can do, what we can't do. It's all been a bit, as I say, left to our own devices. And Brazil's paying the human price for that. We've got, as I said, almost 150,000 dead. It's really quite stunning.
It's quite catastrophic, to be honest. And, we're all, moaning about, and there's potentially more restrictions coming this weekend and stuff. But I hate the phrase the new norm, but it is what it is, and we're all trying to pull it together as best we can. And to be fair, I think most people in Scotland have been pretty sensible. Although there is the odd weekend when they relax things, that there's a shitload of parties getting broken up and stuff like that, and garden parties. But as we move into the cold weather, that will all slow down. But unfortunately, where you are, the weather's is probably stunning. So yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mention that, because I think that's actually a key point with this, is that instead of us having all of these restrictions, and then when a restriction is lifted, everyone thinks it's a free for all. Essentially, what we have to do, I think, as a society, is we all have to kind of look at ourselves and look at our own social habits and just make long-term changes. The amount of times we go out to the pub, the amount of times we hold parties, the amount of times we meet with our friends. We just all have to make these kind of long-term changes, as opposed to basically just waiting for the government to tell us we can go out to the pub again.
Yeah. Are they allowing fans? Are they allowing fans back into football over there yet? Or?
There's a big push for that to happen in Brazil, because a lot of the clubs are just desperate for revenue, and a lot of the clubs were involved in actually getting football back in the first place, which a lot of people said was very rushed and premature. And we've had a lot of issues with coronavirus spread among teams and players and all that sort of stuff. There was one test game up in the north of Brazil, in a state championship final, where they let in a kind of a reduced amount of fans. But the problem, at least from what I saw, I didn't watch the match live on television, but the problem seems to be is that once they're in, there's no way to kind of stop people getting into it and, really getting behind their teams and essentially breaking these kind of social distancing rules. If your team wins a championship final, are you not going to jump up and hug the guy sitting behind you and all that sort of stuff? So it's difficult. Again, I think it's got to be a case of changing our habits until this is we're in a safer situation to go back to this. It's really sad.
Fan culture in Brazil, as well as most places in South America, is pretty crazy, to be fair. And I love watching the videos and stuff with the fans. Sometimes what's going on in the terraces is more interesting than what's going on in the park, to be honest. But listen, I appreciate you coming on, Ewan. Thanks very much for that, and thanks for agreeing to do the podcast. I'll stick this out, as I said, to all the listeners, and hopefully you get some folk tuning into your podcast as well. So I just want to say
Excellent.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
And they gave us James McRory and Paul McStay. They gave us Johnston, Tully, Murdoch, Gold and Hay. And most of the football greats have passed through Parkhead's gates, but to play for